if you're okay with that, I will share it. So I guess I'll just turn it over to Sara, and you can start. There is one question in the chat already, but I'll let you kind of kick it off if you.
Thank you, Chuck. I so appreciate all of that logistical background. And it is so good to be back. It's fun to recognize some of your faces from over a year ago when I was with you for MLK Sunday, actually. And as Chuck was talking, I'm remembering I preached about sin. So it feels like that was a little risky, this question box. We're going to see how it works. It's going to be great. So I appreciate your willingness to welcome me and to engage in conversation with me. Before we jump into questions, I want this to really, this is a worship service. It's not a debate. It's not a, just question and answer time sort of thing. So I want to read a reflection about questions written by a colleague of mine to sort of, in minister language, prepare our hearts for this time together. And then I'll say a little bit about the questions, and then we'll just jump into questions and see how it works. So this reflection is The Only Answer I Know by Reverend Elena Kemmler, excuse me. So I invite you to settle in and join in this time of reflection together. These are her words. In my town, the annual Harvest Fair is a big event. All the groups in town have booths. The Boy Scouts make root beer, the Women's Club offers homemade pies, and the Rotary gives out hot dogs for a donation for the food pantry. My church sells whoopie pies. You can mix and match your choice of flavors for filling and cake. The dance school and karate students perform, and there's a band. It's a rite of passage when kids are old enough to walk around by themselves and collect swag and candy. Last year, I sat at our booth next to a sign saying, "The minister is in, profound questions answered, 25 cents. I borrowed the idea from Lucy's "The Doctor is In" booth from the Peanuts comic strip. Some of the questions were from people wanting to know their purpose or the meaning of their life, which is not something you can really answer for someone else. I had to extemporize, saying that there may be multiple purposes to our lives, or that we can't know the full meaning of our lives because we don't always know how our lives touch other people. A few people asked me to predict the future in ways that were surprising and tender. They wanted to know if the heart surgery would go okay, or the cancer would return, or their husband would recover from his stroke. I preface these answers with the disclosure in the name of professional honesty that I am not psychic, but I also said, in every case, I absolutely believe it's going to be fine. You are going to be fine. I can't know this for sure, of course, but what I do know for sure is that hope matters. One of the best things we can do is hold hope for someone when that person cannot hold it for themselves. Not the careless, casual hope of, I hope things go well for you, but a sturdier hope, a hope which says, I believe in you, even though you might not believe in yourself right now. A hope which says, I see you as whole and brave as hell, even though you feel broken and afraid. It is, I realize, an act of great trust to sit down with the local minister and ask a true question, a question of the heart. Because the questions are also our fears, our worries, our deepest longings. I will hold the questions as carefully as I can, like the gifts they are, and offer hope as the only answer I know. Reverend Kemmler ends her reflection with this prayer in her language. God of all who long for answers in this time of great fear and uncertainty, help us to hold the questions with tenderness and to offer one another a sturdy, faithful hope. End quote. Help us to hold the questions with tenderness. That is our task today. As Chuck mentioned, when I was invited to be a guest preacher with you today, I looked at your other worship services this month, and I saw that the first one was this I believe statement by a former member of this congregation, one person's answer to some of the biggest life questions. And last week was Stephanie Voss's sermon, It Takes Not Knowing. So this week continues this spiritual practice of questioning. I think of questioning as a spiritual practice, not as a way to spiral into our doubt, but as a call to be open to change. The truth as I know it might become bigger, wiser, and more grounded and more useful. As we question, we grow, we change, and we can trust that change. So today is Question Box Sunday. If we were together in person, I would literally have, wrapped a nice shoebox in pretty wrapping paper and passed it around the sanctuary, and you could have put little pieces of paper in it with your questions. But since we are virtual, Chuck will become the MC of this time together, and either read questions in the chat or call on people so we can take turns that way. So what does that mean? It sounds like there's already a couple of questions. I am not going to be looking at the chat because it gets distracting, but you all are invited to ask me questions that I will answer from the bottom of my heart and off the top of my head. I want to be clear that this is not a chance to try to stump the minister. I will not know answers to some, esoteric 18th century German theologian. I mean, I might if you ask me about Schleiermacher, but that's as far as my knowledge is going to go. So rather, this is an opportunity to ask questions about Unitarian Universalism, theology, religion, relationships, life, what you most wonder about or struggle with. This is a worship service that we create together in real time. So we will be open to how this unfolds. If there is some awkwardness where there's no questions, we're going to be okay with the awkwardness. If there's too many questions to answer in this time together, we will carry them with us into our day and hold the questions as we move forward. So I invite you now to share your questions either in chat or raise your hand. And Chuck, what's my first question? Okay, I also feel like I want to say, this is unfolding for me in real time as well. So I am 100% positive, at like 4 o'clock today, I'll have a much better answer to whatever these questions are. But that is kind of the point of it as well, because this experience will change me. I will think about things more. So this is the beginning of the conversation and preliminary answers to these questions. All right, Chuck.
Okay, why don't we start with one of the ones in the chat here.
Thank you.
How do you learn about cultures and religions without culturally appropriating them, especially in religious education?
I love that this question is about balancing the core values of Unitarian Universalism, that we are this faith that wants to be open to, all of these different ways of answering questions, but also be respectful of, justice issues and white supremacy and all of that. My answer is that if we are, I'm already tripping on the word we, but I'm thinking about we as generally a predominantly white space, white church, white community, that it is our task anytime we are in that sort of position of power to be the ones who listen. So if we are the ones who are speaking more about whatever the topic is, that to me is cultural appropriation. When we take over the space and think it's okay, a very specific turn to, or a specific example to, as a white woman, if I had dreadlocks, that would be me taking over the space of what is traditionally a Black woman or a Black hairstyle. But if our stance changes to a listening stance instead of a speaking stance, that is how we are learning, as opposed to just sort of consumer culturalism, taking on the wisdom of other communities and other cultures. And in practice in religious education, that's tricky because there also has to be some teaching about it. So to think of it explicitly in a religious education space, to use the words from the culture that we are teaching about, not white people or Unitarian Universalist talking about that culture, but the actual culture, the actual words from that culture that we are using instead of our interpretation of the culture.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Um,
And
so
I feel like that's also like a question that every sentence that I said we could unpack in 4 hours. So
Right.
I'm already like, I wish that this were a chance for conversation as well. And I'm going to focus on the next question. All right. Chuck.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of questions could be a topic for a whole Sunday at least.
Exactly.
Does somebody have one? There's another in the chat, but we can move on to a live one if somebody has one. Shall I read from the chat? I'll go to the next one. Let's see.
Amy was raising her hand, I think.
Okay, Amy.
Yeah, can you hear me? I have my earbuds on, so
Yes.
can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
all right. So I was listening to Krista Tippett this morning, and she had Ariel Berger on. He was talking about being a witness, and then he kind of summed up the Jewish faith in 3 words. Be a blessing. 3 words, be a blessing. So I'm just wondering if the UUs have something, like that, if you got a mantra or a, I don't know, sort of a short declarative statement of some sort.
I literally have the t-shirt that I think sums up Unitarian Universalism, and especially Universalism, which is love the hell out of this world. That there are pockets of hell within our own hearts, our own pain and trauma and grief and loss and wonderings and loneliness. And then there is systemic white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and homophobia. And so it is our task to love the hell out of those spaces in our hearts that are hurting and those spaces in the world that are hurting. So that would be my answer to what Unitarian Universalism is. And to me, that means that there is a heart component to it. I think the intellectual, like I can talk about Schleiermacher if you want to do an intellectual conversation about Unitarian Universalism, but I think what matters for me about our faith is that it is a lived experience of who and how we are in the world and how we are in relationship with others.
Great. One from the chat. Can you define the terms or concepts of faith, spirituality, the nature of divinity, and the role of humanity? How do each of these interact with each other?
For those who are wondering about that language, that was in the write-up of what this service was. So that's a great sort of foundational question. So we are all sort of having the same conversation here. I think for me, spirituality is a sense of awe and connection when I am in relationship with another or sitting under a starry sky, that there is some aspect about both my own, simultaneously my own importance and my own insignificance. And so that relationship with the universe, relationship with something transcendent, traditional language calls that God, many UUs do not. So there's something about that relationship with something bigger than myself, which is why nature of divinity is an interesting question to me. For me, this is my answer. The nature of divinity is this inherently creative force in the universe. And then the role of humanity for me is to tap into this creative force in the universe to create more beauty, create more justice, create more relationships, create more learning, create more knowledge. So when we are guided by that sense of wonder, it moves us to connect with that creative source. Is that all of the terms? Did I get them all? I'm not sure if those are definitions, but they are explanations of what I mean by that. And I'll also say that idea of if we, there's an Emerson quote that, this is not the quote, something about everyone worships something, some sort of God. And so to articulate what it is that we hold as the utmost, what we hold as the most true, means that that is what we are most in relationship with. And so if we don't articulate that nature of divinity or what we hold as the utmost truth, it's harder to be in relationship with it, harder to move forward with it, to really know what we are dedicating our lives to. So that's the underlying assumption of why I think these conversations are important.
Anyone have a question?
I might.
Okay, I love that even as a starting. Okay, yeah.
Well, to me, one of the prime things in conservative religions is patriarchy.
Mm, mm.
And I try to understand why a person might need that father figure. And I'm not saying anything, in my personal life, I'm neutral about that. As my father was fine, okay, but in general, maybe that is a good question, right? Like it is. So,
I mean, I don't know if you noticed my body language at that point, but it was hard to have a poker face because I can talk about patriarchy and religion a lot. I think that it is, it's absolutely core to what I think a lot of toxic theology is. So personally for me, let me couch my answer in my own personal experience of patriarchy and religion, one of the many. I was raised Catholic. I, from a very young age, was incredibly interested in religious community in this way that people come together to ask the biggest life questions. I volunteered a ton in church, like in middle school, I was volunteering at church, like that was my thing. And I was explicitly told that I could not be a religious leader because I did not project the image of God. So not only was I not able to become a priest, I wasn't able to become a priest because I didn't project the image of God, that only men could project the image of God. You can see why this is problematic and why I call it toxic theology. If we define God as male and have the assumption that it's white male, that's where the greatest authority lies. I think that, there are some parallels to recent people in political power where white male authority, patriarchal authority, is underscored by this idea of God being male and likely white. So I actually, it took me, 20 years to get past that internalized patriarchy and become a Unitarian Universalist minister. The first time I went to a Unitarian Universalist church, there was a woman preaching. This was in the mid-90s, and it still brings tears to my eyes how important that moment was for me, that a woman could be seen as a religious leader. Because there is something about, that phrase, the nature of divinity, that also includes women and non-binary people and people of all genders. So I'm not sure that that's even an answer to your question or where to go from that question, but to name that if we are limiting God to a particular gender, we are limiting our experience of humanity, and I think that is.
Well, I guess,
yeah.
My question is sort of more about why people want that, why people need that. Maybe that's not, but it's more like a psychology question.
No, I feel like, so that pause and that looking up was me like actually finding that is an important question. I mean, I think authority is safe it feels good to know that someone else is in charge, whether that is God or, a white male political figure, that there is a sense of potentially more order in the universe, that there is something that is powerful, that is not me, and that I can put my trust in. So I think that would likely be my guess as to why people are, and I'm saying that in a way that I mean as a charitable thing, like that is a human need to feel like there is something bigger than oneself that one wants to trust. And then the way that we socialize people to think that that is male, that is a masculine figure, that power comes through masculinity, I think is where it becomes problematic. But
yeah, that's fine. It's hard not having been raised with that.
Yeah.
To understand why it is important to people. But thank you.
And I mean, the truth is, having been in that tradition, if you question that, then you have to worry about if you're going to go to hell or not. And so there is an element of fear if you aren't following that. So it's not only, trust and power, but fear if you question that or don't follow it.
And if I could add, I think there's part of it is people are comfortable with the familiarity of the tradition and just feel, they don't they don't think about it in those terms very much, or whatever, that they like the community and they just kind of, it's comfortable for them or whatever,
I felt grief when I left Catholicism. I mean, that it wasn't just an easy split. So I think that that's true as well.
Okay, let's see. Do we have any more in the chat right now? Yes, let me. Okay, here's one from the chat. Oh no, that's the same one. The scroll bar on this thing is okay. That's the only.
Mike has his hand up.
Okay, Mike.
I was just wondering if your phrase, the love the hell out of this world. How does the church's teaching say we should be going out into the world, which doesn't become something of changing others rather than respecting others?
Oh, are you asking about conversion, evangelism?
Yep.
Yeah. Ooh, interesting, fun question. So let me answer it this way. I'm going to go universalist theology, and then come back to the specifics of what your question is. So universalism, is hundreds of years old, and the preaching of universalism, the universalism part of Unitarian Universalism, is very much has always been that God loves everyone. This is traditional. There is no one outside of God's circle. So no one is going to hell. Some people might go to purgatory for a while, but no one is going to hell forever because God's love is so complete that we can't escape it. And then which means early universalists, and I think what we are called to do now, because hell is removed from the afterlife, the entire purpose of religion is to create that sense of heaven here on earth, to eradicate hell wherever we find it. If we are trying to love the hell out of this world and eradicate hell wherever we find it, and we are doing that by wanting someone else to change, that's not actually a loving response to who they are. Again, traditional religious language, God loves them as they are. We are not trying to convert them to agree with our way of thinking. But if they are in pain, if the world is in pain, then we are called to respond to that. Which I mean, I also want to name that there is a difference between loving other people and loving all behaviors. So we don't have to accept behaviors of people that, you know, are damaging, racist, homophobic. But there is a sense that to serve this greater love means that we need to call out those behaviors. So for me, I kind of am an evangelical Unitarian Universalist because I didn't know it existed. And once I found you all, my people, that has been a life-giving part of my, my religious experience and my religious healing and my religious growth. But if someone is in a tradition that they are comfortable with and is also life-giving for them, it certainly is not my task to convert people. I'm wondering if there's I feel like I'm talking in generalities, Mike, and maybe not answering your question specifically. Is that, anytime I start with Universalist theology, it goes a little bit big picture, but did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
I think I'm on a little adventure of my own of traveling with the idea of connecting cultures. And part of that is also respecting others, but I'm also a former Catholic or still Catholic. I don't know which way you say that because I sure will be for forever. But in interacting with others and sharing our faith, it seems like it's a real difficult challenge to, I mean, even if you base it on actions, one of the things I learned in Mexico was that what we see as pain, oftentimes they don't experience life the same way we do. And so we come in with our own prejudices that make it very, very difficult to be open-minded. I was bawled out many times for things that I did that I thought was very innocent, but
I think when you're talking like that, what it's making me think of is approaching those conversations with humility, which means, you know, an open-heartedness to hearing another person's truth. That doesn't necessarily mean that your truth will change. It might, because that's what happens in relationship with people. But that there is a mutuality of conversation. So conversion means there's not a mutuality of conversation. It means I think I have a really good idea of what you all need, and I'm going to tell you, and that is how things should go. As opposed to, I have a truth, you have a truth, and it can be a little bit messy to talk about that and to disagree, but that that if we are approaching those conversations with humility, with that sense of deep listening, with a willingness to be changed ourselves, not only change other people. I mean, I think that's where the magic happens for me in cultural conversations.
I have a question. Couple of the labels or categories that a lot of UUs fall under, individual UUs as well as different congregations, are either more spiritual or more humanist. And is there a blending, is there a blurring of the lines some way we can think about being a spiritual humanist, I guess?
Yes. So I have like 10 simultaneous answers, but I'll share 2 simultaneous answers that come to my head. Again, my own personal theology, I'm a religious naturalist, which means I don't believe in any sort of supernatural power in the universe, like that there isn't some consciousness that is controlling things. But I believe that the universe itself is a sacred text, that science can can share religious truths with us, that we can be inspired with our connection to the universe and our learnings about the universe. So to me, faith and science aren't actually different. They're the same thing. They're asking the same questions. So we can read the Big Bang as scientific fact, scientific theory, and then also see it as, you know, this sense of awe and wonder and this religious truth that we are all stardust. And so it feels like both science and religion can produce this sense of awe. So I don't think that they need to be in conflict. And I think that there are a lot of Unitarian Universalists who are really starting to talk about that sort of ways that, that we can be inspired by both. And also, the other thing that I want to mention with that question is our 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. So we often talk about the 7 principles, potentially soon to be 8 principles of Unitarian Universalism. But the 6 sources starts with direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life, which I kind of babbled through quickly, but I think is intensely beautiful as the foundational source of our religious tradition, that it is about direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder. We can't do that without science. We can't do that without relationships. So those things are, I think, inherently in conversation. And another one of the sources is humanism. And so we can never, that is part of who we are as a religious tradition. And we should honor that and bring it forth more fully. And that's not the only language that people use to talk about the transcendent. So if we're going to actually be Unitarian Universalists, we get to, I mean, it kind of goes to the humility thing. We get to say our own truth and listen to other people's truths and be in relationship as we figure out what that means. Whether we are humanists or theists or pagan or Buddhist or any of it.
And I would recommend listening to Peter Mayer music to help.
Yes, yes. Everything is holy now. Exactly. Right. Yes.
And he's got quite a few songs about awe and wonder of scientific things.
He is, yes, very much. That is religious. That is the soundtrack of religious naturalism. Yes. And not that you have to be religious naturalist to be UU. I don't mean it that way at all. I just mean that I think that that is this exactly what you're talking about, this blending of head and heart, humanism, spirituality, that we don't have to pick one or the other. We can integrate both if it feels authentic for us to do so.
Okay, great. That answers my question very well. Megan.
My question has to do with the Common Good Interfaith Group. I attended one of the meetings. Actually, I attended one in person and one online. And I felt completely inept to express my religious feelings. I don't exactly can say my truth is, my truth changes. And I would like to go to that group again, but I don't feel as though I can. Everybody there, they're either Muslim or Christian, and they're very certain about how they feel and what they believe. And I just feel nebulous. So I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions about how, and I think you kind of touched on it in some of your other answers, but how to express this idea of what Unitarian Universalism is and why I have been one for more than 50 years. And I can't quite put my finger on it, which seems strange to other people who have very set feelings and ideas about their religion.
I mean, I think as Unitarian Universalists, practicing our answer to that is important. Like actually being in small groups and in conversations and saying out loud and babble, like, okay, I'm not actually a huge fan of, role playing, but role playing is actually really helpful as Unitarian Universalists because it is this countercultural sort of way of doing religion. And so if we are practicing saying what we believe out loud, that is helpful. I will also say though, one of the most helpful things that a mentor of mine says in those sorts of situations, and this kind of doesn't answer your exact question because I think that's a question that you actually need to articulate for yourself, what being Unitarian Universalist means to you. But there's often a sense when I am in those sort of interfaith groups of being dismissed, or maybe I'm projecting, but feeling like they're like, oh, it's just like, it's a whatever religion. It's not really a religion, that sort of thing. And to explicitly say, this is language that I feel comfortable saying, so you can, use it as you will. My faith is as important to me as yours is to you. Like that there is a sense that even though Unitarian Universalism is often shifting and moving and we're learning new truths and asking questions and, there's not this sort of, there's no creed, my faith is as important to me as yours is to you. And I think that's a way of getting past the differences in beliefs to actually the experience of religion. If they are asking for, like a really concise statement about Unitarian Universalism, and it is a religious group, I often use phrases like, we are a religion of shared values, not shared beliefs. And so we agree to an approach to religion. We agree to being, in relationship with each other, but we have very different beliefs about God. To have sort of a specific, to say that we are a non-creedal religion is a helpful way for people who are in mainstream religion to at least know some basics about us.
Thank you. I remember the elevator story thing where you're supposed to.
Yes.
That completely flummoxed me.
That's a really good example of like, yes, doing an elevator speech where if you're stuck on an elevator with someone and they ask you what your religion is, that you can answer by the time you get to the top floor. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that I think it's nice to practice and, do some conversations about and to have an elevator speech that feels authentic to you.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and this is the thing, right? Where I can't write your elevator speech because that would be super non-UU. So
can the elevator, can the building have like 900 floors?
And furthermore, some point B, yeah.
Right. Okay, Jim has a question, and I think he's going to, do his own question here.
Yeah.
Sure. Just kind of like for Alice too, because I listen to people who say things that other people are wrong because of their color or gender preference, because it's against religious writing or what God ordained. So I've always wanted to, I don't know if I've ever actually asked somebody this question, but the question I want to ask them, did you create God in your image, or did God create people in his image, which include all the people around us that are, have different gender preferences, have different colors, so I don't know. And to Alice, it's like, why is it that God is a male image? Well, because the person writing it was a white male, right?
The people in power, exactly. I've heard the phrase, you know someone has created God in their image if God hates the same people you do or they do, which seems exactly right. That is a very limited, that is a human construct of the divine that I think is wrong. And when I'm in those spaces, I mean, you know, I definitely believe in humility in conversations, and I also am UU enough to say I think that's wrong. I think it is wrong to say that God is we don't get to create God in our image.
Well, it isn't always a white man. I mean, look all over around the world and
Right.
the gods that have
Exactly.
been created.
I mean,
And,
yes.
and that interesting thought about Allah and how there is no image of Allah is kind of interesting.
Yes. And also, I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because I am very much speaking from, you know, like the Christianity and tied to empire and capitalism type of Christianity, which is not a lot of people's experience of Christianity, and certainly not Judaism, and many of the teachings of Judaism, you know, this idea of, yeah. So I appreciate that I was making some assumptions on the they, and it's much more complex than that, within the United States and certainly globally. Yes.
Awesome. Let's see. How are we doing on time? Oh, gosh.
Chuck, can I say one more little thing?
Yes.
I carry this in my purse.
Yes. I love it.
So if someone really wants to get into it deeply, I whip that out.
Well, and I also often say that's helpful as well. Like, we don't ask other people to define their religion on an elevator. I mean, I think it is this particular thing about UUs that we feel like we have to have a simple answer for a religion that's not simple. Though there are, I think, core truths that we can name and call out for ourselves and to share with others. But yeah.
Say, Chuck, you keep missing Amy.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, that's okay. I'm kind of new at this UU stuff.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sort of new at all this. So do the UUs have a mission statement or something like that? You did mention these 7 principles, soon to become 8. Because one of the things that I do is I work with brands and positioning, and you know, I work on the communication side, you know, so I'll come up with the messaging. And the messaging, of course, is so important.
Yeah,
and that's part of the elevator speech. And the elevator speech comes out of the messaging.
Yep, exactly.
Or creates it.
Yes.
However you want to look at it.
Welcome to Unitarian Universalism. So glad that you are, you know, that your search has brought you to this moment. So there are 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, which are the values that we aspire to. It starts with, and this is actually the messaging answer that I would give you. It starts with the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And then the 7th one is the interdependent web of all creation that we are a part of. So it's really this idea that there is both an individual and a network and a web that we are connected to. So it is inherently a religion that celebrates both of those things and holds both of those things in tension, what it means to be both fully ourselves and a part of, you know, nature and community. And then there are the 6 sources, which are the different things that inspire us that I talked about earlier. So those are the main, we do not have a creed, but those are the common language that we agree to as Unitarian Universalists. I will also add, we are not a covenantal religion. I'm sorry, we are not a creedal religion. We are a covenantal religion. So it is about the promises that we make to each other and to the earth and to the world in covenant, which can be broken and then repaired, which is also an inherent part of our tradition.
Megan, did you have a...
And we also need better marketing. So like, I feel like we could chat a ton about that because, yeah.
Megan, did you have a raised hand
That
there?
would be fun. That'd be
Really
fun
fun.
anytime.
Really fun. I love this idea of, yeah, anyway, yes. Okay.
I did have a comment or question, but I was listening so intently now I've forgotten.
Okay.
That's all right. You were in the moment. Things are unfolding as they should. This is what I'm talking about. It's great.
Yeah.
You were changed by relationship. That's perfect.
And our time is winding down here. So I would also say, Amy, you could look on our website and look at our DUUC mission statement, and maybe maybe it's time we revisit our congregational mission statement.
Which is a part of Unitarian Universalism as well, that every congregation is its own entity. We are an association of congregations. So each individual congregation's mission statement will be a really, one would hope, beautiful articulation of who they are and who they are called to be in the community.
I have gone online and looked at the mission statements of other churches, and it's really interesting. I recommend it.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we should wind down here. Thank you so much,
Sue
Sarah.
had a comment. Sue raised her hand.
Oh, sorry.
Sue's-
Go ahead, Sue.
Just briefly, I realized that haven't done a real good job of being an older sister to my younger sister. I've been in the UU world for about 30 years now. And so Amy, I'm so thrilled that Amy has started coming to our meetings.
Yeah.
And Amy, I will give you any information that I have that will help you. We can talk too on the phone about UUism and all right. Thank you.
Love it.
All right. So once again, thank you, Sarah. This was great. I do have